There was a version of me that did not stop. I say a version because that's how it feels from here, looking back at it. Not because I'm distancing myself from responsibility for what happened. Not because I'm trying to make it someone else's story. It's mine. The facts of it are mine, and the body that was in it was this body, and the mind that ran the decisions was this mind. But the state that person was in, the mode they were operating in, the particular quality of their refusal, that state isn't available to me now, and the unavailability is what makes them feel like a different person rather than an earlier version of the same one. An earlier version would be accessible. You can usually find the thread back to earlier versions, recognize them in photographs, inhabit their logic even if you choose differently now. The version of me that was in the situation is not accessible in that way. I can know what they did. I can know the approximate duration and the intensity of the effort and the outcome. I cannot get back inside the state they were in. The state ended and I came out of it, and it didn't come with me. So, a version. Another person who lived in this body before I moved back in. What I know about that person is mostly external. I know the duration, longer than I would have predicted. I know the conditions. They were not good. They were the kind that usually ends the duration faster. I know the outcome, which is this: the current life, the apartment, and the coffee, and the walk to the train, and the Tuesday bread. I know that they kept going when continuing required more than continuing usually requires. Not as inspiration, just as fact. The system ran past the point where the system would normally stop, and it kept running, and it produced the outcome, which was getting out. These are the things I can report from the outside. They're accurate as far as I can verify them. What I can't report is what it felt like to be them, because the feeling state of that mode is not in my current repertoire. I've tried to access it, and what I find instead is the shape of it, the outline, the way you can see the dimensions of a room from outside it without being in it. The dimensions were considerable. The room was very loud or very silent, I'm not sure which. The extremes feel equivalent from outside. Something in there was running at a rate that I can measure in retrospect but not experience in retrospect. They ran at that rate for the duration. I don't know how. I've tried to find them in myself. Not for the situation. I'm not in a situation that requires it, but just to understand, to locate the continuity. To find the thread from here to there that would let me say, yes, we are the same person. This is just what that person looks like at rest. I find partial things. The stubbornness is still here. I know this. It shows up in smaller forms. The work finished past the reasonable hour. The thing not let go of that I should have let go of. The refusal to concede certain arguments. These are recognizable as belonging to the same set. The no lower gear quality, the tendency to run at a higher output than the moment strictly requires. So the root is here, the same soil. But the version of the thing that was operational during the situation was so far along the same spectrum that it barely registers as related. The stubbornness that makes me finish work late and the stubbornness that ran the system in conditions it wasn't designed for. These are the same quality at magnitudes so different they don't feel continuous. It's like recognizing that a spark and a forest fire are the same phenomenon. The recognition doesn't mean you know the fire from knowing the spark. People who witnessed some portion of what happened or who were told about it afterward sometimes say things that imply they're describing me. They use my name and they use the past tense and they describe actions that are in the record and they say, you did this, you kept going, you held on. I receive these accounts and I nod and I say yes, and both of those things are true. Yes, that person exists in the record, and yes, I don't fully recognize them. This is not false modesty, and it's not dissociation in any clinical sense. Dr. Okafor and I have been through the clinical question, and the clinical answer is that what I'm describing is within the range of normal responses to extreme situations, the self reorganizing around the event in ways that produce a sense of discontinuity. The clinical answer is reassuring in the way that accurate information is reassuring without being comfortable. I'm not describing clinical dissociation. I'm describing something simpler and stranger, the feeling that the person who survived is not the person now describing the survival. That there were two people and the handoff between them was imperfect, and what didn't transfer in the handoff was the state itself, the fuel of it, the knowledge from the inside of what it was like to be that capable of continuing. I've been thinking about what it means to owe something. Not in the financial sense, not in the moral sense exactly. In the sense of something was done for my benefit, by someone, at cost to themselves, and I'm living off the results of that doing without having paid the cost. The version of me that didn't stop paid the cost. They paid it in the only currency available, which was everything: the reserves, the physical capacity, the forward lean I've been trying to locate ever since and can't fully find, the appetite for what was coming, all of it spent in the spending that got me out. They spent it and they handed it to me, and I am here because of it, and they are not here, not in the way they were there. What I got was continuation, the apartment, the coffee, the walk, the life in its current quiet form, what they gave to produce that, themselves, in the full version. The high running, no lower gear, arrow pointing only forward version. That person spent themselves into me, into the current quieter version, and the exchange produced this. I don't know what to do with that accounting. I've been sitting with it since the early months, and I haven't produced a clean answer. I'm not the person who survived. I'm the person the survivor made possible. This might sound like a distinction without difference. The body is the same body. The legal name is the same name. The address is continuous. The work history is continuous. The friendships are continuous in their diminished or altered forms. But the quality that was the center of that version, the thing that ran the system and kept running it and produced the outcome, that isn't here in the form it was there. It got spent. I've said this before and I'll keep saying it because it's the most accurate thing I know how to say. The spending was the cost, and the cost was total. What I have instead is the after version. Quieter, flatter in the ways I've described, running at a lower output. Carrying the structural tiredness that sleep doesn't reach, the gap question, the untranslatable thing, functional, present, doing the work and maintaining the relationships and going to the sessions and buying the bread, but not that person. I woke up after, and I was already not them. The transition was not gradual. It was the moment between the mode running and the mode stopping. One side of that moment, them. Other side, me. Same body, same name, same address, different interior. What I'm trying to locate is not grief exactly. It's something more functional than grief, more cognitive. A recognition that something was done for me by a version of me that I had no say in creating and no ability to sustain, and that the something was costly, and that the cost is now in my accounting whether I want it there or not. I look at the record of what that person did and I think, I wouldn't have done that. Which is strange because I did. Or they did, and I'm the continuation of them and the doing is in my history, but I look at the record and I don't find myself in it. I find someone who was capable of more than I'm capable of now, someone who ran at a rate I can't currently access, someone who got me here, and who is, in all the ways that matter internally, no longer around to ask how it feels to be arrived. The current version wakes up tired, not from the night specifically. The night was adequate, 6 hours, broken once around 3, which is the usual pattern, recovery time within range. The tiredness is the structural kind, the kind that predates the alarm and will outlast whatever the day provides in the way of rest. I've stopped expecting the morning inventory to find it gone. It's a fixed item now, same as the water stain on the ceiling, same as the keys in the left pocket. I note it, I get up. This is what the current version does, notes and proceeds. The noting has become a practice, the proceeding a habit, and between the two of them, the morning gets started and the day gets underway, and from the outside, it looks like a person beginning their day. From the inside, it looks like a careful series of small managements. I found a photograph last week, not the one I mentioned before. A different one, older, from a period I think of as solidly before, not the immediate before, but several years before that, a version of me that predates the event entirely. I'm at some outdoor gathering, the light behind me, and I mid-laugh at something outside the frame, turned toward it, leaning. The lean. It's visible in the photograph as a physical fact. My body inclined toward whatever was happening, toward the laugh, toward the person who said the thing, toward the general direction of the next moment. Not dramatic, just the natural posture of a person who was moving toward things. I looked at the photograph for a while. I wasn't studying it for the grief in it. I was studying it because I wanted to understand it, the lean, what it looked like from the outside, whether the outside evidence matched the inside memory of what it felt like. It did. The photograph looked exactly like what I remembered it feeling like from inside. A forward pull, a wanting toward, the body expressing the appetite for the next thing before the mind had identified it. I put the photograph back. The apartment was the apartment. I made coffee. The person in that photograph would not recognize certain things about the current version. The speed, first of all. I move through decisions more slowly than I used to. Not incompetently. The decisions get made, the work gets done, the outcomes are what they need to be. But the person in the photograph made decisions the way people make decisions when they believe the next thing is worth getting to, which imparts a forward motion to the choosing. The current version makes decisions the way you make decisions when the next thing is the next thing, neutral, one item following another, and the item doesn't pull you forward, you proceed toward it by will. The ambition, second. I'm aware that the before me had things they were working toward, projects in progress, forward structures, the architecture of a future they were building toward. I know this because the evidence of it is still around, in files and notes and half-finished things that still sit in their half-finished state, not because I abandoned them exactly, more because the part that was carrying them stopped carrying them and I didn't notice immediately, and by the time I noticed the structures had gone cold. I've started some of them again, in partial forms. Dr. Okafor thinks engagement with prior interests is good for the current person, and I believe her, and I act on the belief. I do the partial work. The partial work is real work. But I'm aware that I'm doing it at a different setting than the person who started it, without the forward lean that initiated it, by an act of choice rather than by the natural pull of wanting to get to the finish. It gets done. It doesn't carry me, physically. I should say something about this because the physical is where the contrast is most legible and least discussed. The before person, both the immediate before and the further before, had a specific physical register, higher energy baseline, faster recovery from exertion, a body that cooperated with demands placed on it without requiring significant negotiation. I ran occasionally, I mean literally ran, in the way of a person for whom running was a default available option rather than a deliberate undertaking. I tried to run 2 months ago, not for any performance reason, not training, just, it was spring, and the park was there, and running seemed like a thing available to do. I ran for 12 minutes, and I felt the structural tiredness amplify in a way that was information. Not the healthy tiredness of exertion, not the kind that means the body is working, the other kind. The kind that means the body's reserves are being drawn against a balance I'm still trying to rebuild. I walked home. I've tried again since, shorter distances, and the walking is fine. The walking is good. The park is useful in the way I've always found it useful. Running remains something I'm approaching more slowly. The body is not the body that was in the situation. That body spent resources that haven't fully replenished. I don't know if they will replenish to the prior level. The instruments don't measure what I'm asking about. My friend Tomas made a joke last month. We were at the kitchen table, the good visit, the bread he brought. He was telling a story about a work situation, something that required navigating a difficult personality, and he described what he'd done with the particular relish of someone who'd found a solution they were proud of. He's funny in the telling of things, and the story was funny, and I laughed at the right place. Then he said, "You would have handled that completely differently a couple years ago. Not an accusation, just observation, the kind old friends make, comparative and fond." I asked, "How so?" He said, "You would have gone straight at it. No maneuvering. You would have just gone straight at it." I thought about this. I said, "Probably." He said, "Not that your way is wrong." You've always been more direct than me. A pause. You seem, I don't know, more careful now. More careful. I turned it over. He meant it descriptively, not critically. He was noticing the difference between the before version, which he knew well, and the current version, which he is still mapping. The direct going straight at it was a function of the before version's forward lean, the same energy that produced the lean in the photograph. The current version approaches things more carefully because careful is what's available, because the surplus of forward-moving energy that made directness cheap has been spent. I said, maybe. Things are different. He said, yeah. He nodded slowly. You seem okay, though. I said, I am okay. Both true. I am okay, and different, and more careful, and less of some things that he knew and is now noticing the reduction of, without the vocabulary to name what he's noticing. I was better at things than I am now. I want to say this plainly without apology or self-pity or the qualification that tries to find the silver lining in the reduction. Some people are better after hard things, and some are different after hard things, and some are less in certain ways after hard things, and I am, in some specific and innumerable ways, less driven, less fast, less direct in the way Tomas noticed. Less capable of the kind of sustained high-output effort that the before version produced as a matter of course. The before version did those things without particularly noticing it was doing them. The current version notices everything it does, because everything it does requires some degree of management. This is not tragedy. I don't experience it as tragedy. It's more like the difference between a car that runs and a car that runs but requires monitoring, that you keep an eye on the temperature gauge for, that you don't push past a certain threshold without checking the reserves first. Both cars get you somewhere. Only one of them requires you to think about the driving while you're driving. The person who spent everything to get me out of the situation was stronger than I am. I know this without drama, without it needing to mean something beyond itself. They were in a state of capacity I am not currently in and may not return to. The evidence suggests they were capable of things I'm not currently capable of, and the things they were capable of were the things that produced the outcome. I benefit from their capability every day. I wake up and make the coffee and write the list and go to work. And the going to work is possible because they kept going. And I look at what I can do now and what they could do then, and the distance between those two things is not something I can close by trying. The current version isn't the version that survived. It's the version that survived into. And the surviving into is a lesser thing, in some real and measurable ways, than the surviving. I don't know what to do with this. I carry it alongside the structural tiredness and the gap question and the untranslatable thing. One more item in the accounting. One more weight without resolution. The debt arrived without announcement, not immediately. In the early weeks, there was too much else. The forms, the appointments, the administrative residue of what had happened, the social management of everyone's relief. The debt didn't have room to make itself known while all of that was happening, while the external requirements filled the available space. It arrived later. In the quieter period, when the forms were filed and the appointments had settled into a routine and the people around me had returned to their ordinary rhythms and the apartment was just the apartment, quiet in the evening, the list written and the day's items completed, I was sitting on the couch and I had the thought, not for the first time, but for the first time fully formed. They went through all of that so I could sit here. Not they as in other people, they as in the version. The version that ran the system past its designed parameters, that spent everything available, that kept the arrow pointing forward when forward required more than forward usually requires. They did that so I could sit on this couch in this apartment with this quiet evening. And the couch is fine, and the apartment is fine, and the evening is fine, and I am doing approximately nothing with it. I want to be careful with this feeling, because it has a shape that resembles other feelings that aren't quite accurate to the situation. It resembles survivor's guilt in the way it's usually described, the guilt of the person who asks why they made it when others didn't. I have some version of that too, a separate account, and it sits in its own place. What I'm describing here is different and more internal, less about the others and more about the self-to-self transaction. It also resembles the motivational framing, the idea that surviving creates an obligation to live fully, to honor the survival with the life it produced. I've read this framing and I understand it, and I don't find it accurate to what I actually feel, which is less aspirational than that, less directed outward, more like the feeling of having borrowed something expensive from a version of yourself that no longer exists to collect on the debt. The debt isn't toward the world, it's inward. It's owed to the version, and the version isn't here to define the terms. What would count as payment? I've turned this over many times and I don't have a clean answer, and I'm not sure a clean answer exists, but I turn it over because the turning is more honest than leaving it unexamined. The version that spent everything might have wanted, the life fully inhabited, the lean maintained, the forward motion uncompromised. The before life at its best, vigorous and directed and leaning into what was coming. That seems like the intuitive answer to what they'd have wanted from the survival they produced. The current version can't deliver that. The delivery would require the resources the version spent to produce the outcome. The resources were spent in the production. The current version is running on what remained after the spending, which is less, which produces a lesser output than the version was capable of and probably would have expected. So the debt is unpayable on the obvious terms, and the terms have no one to renegotiate them with, because the version isn't here. There are days when I feel the pressure of it directly, not dramatically. It doesn't arrive as a crisis or a loud internal accusation. It arrives more like weather, a particular quality of the morning, a sense of something pressing lightly on the day's surface. On these days, the gap question takes a different form. Instead of now what, it becomes something closer to, is this enough? Is this enough to justify what the version paid? The work done to the standard it's done to. The relationships maintained. The bread bought and eaten and appreciated. The niece in the lap. The sparrow in the hedge. The coffee that sometimes arrives fully. The list written and completed. Is this what was worth it? I don't have a way to answer this that satisfies the asking. I produce the answer. Yes, this is a life. It functions. It contains things that are real. The bread is real. The niece is real. Reyes and Tomas and my sister and the Tuesday ritual are real. And the pressure remains, lightly, on the surface. Because the version went through what they went through and what they produced was this. And this is not what they were. And the distance between what they were and what I am is the gap across which the debt sits. Uncollectible, unanswered. I spoke to Dr. Okafor about this, not with these exact words, but in the vicinity of these words, circling the territory, letting her see the shape of what I was carrying. She asked, "What do you think the version of you that survived would actually want for you?" I said, "I don't know. I can't ask them." She said, "If you could." I said, "They'd probably want me to be more than I am, more like them, more capable of the high output, the forward motion." She said, "Why probably?" I sat with that. I said, "Because that was who they were. The high output was just their normal operation. Of course they'd want to see it continue." She said, "Or they did what they did because it was required, not because they believed the mode was the ideal mode. Maybe what they'd want is for you to not be in a situation that requires that anymore." I looked at the fern. I said, "That's a more charitable reading than I usually give it." She said, "What does your reading require of you?" I said, "More than I currently have." She said, "And hers." I said, "Just to be here, to be okay." She said, "Which you are." I said, "In the limited sense." She said, "The limited sense is a real sense." I'm not sure I believe her reading. Not because she's wrong exactly, but because the charitable reading requires a confidence about the version's interiority that I don't have access to verify. Maybe she's right. Maybe the version spent everything without particular expectation of what the spending would produce. Just spend it and get out. The after that isn't the problem of the mode. The mode's only problem is continuing. If that's true, then the debt is different, smaller, or not smaller, but differently shaped. Not owed in performance, not owed in living up to their capacity, owed simply in continuance. In, be here. In, keep going. In, write the list and complete the items and find the bread on Tuesdays and sit on the floor with the niece. That debt I'm paying. Daily, on schedule, without default. But I can't settle into that reading fully because something in me, the stubborn part, the no lower gear part that is the same root as the version's core trait, keeps presenting the other reading alongside it. The one that says, they were more than this. You are the product of someone who is more than this, be more than this. And the this that I am doesn't have the capacity to close the gap. My brother said something to me, in passing months ago. We were at his house for a weekend visit, the house with the garden and the noise of his family around it, and I was sitting on the back step in the afternoon while the kids were somewhere inside. He came out and sat next to me, and we were quiet for a while, the way brothers can be quiet, and then he said, I don't know how you did it. Not as a compliment, not in the way people say it, meaning, you're impressive. He said it in the way of someone who has genuinely thought about it and arrived at genuine incomprehension. I said, I don't either. He said, I think about it sometimes. What I would have. He stopped. I don't know. I said, the version of me that did it isn't the version sitting here. He looked at me. I said, that's not a complaint. It's just accurate. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, you seem like you, though. I said, I seem like me because I'm continuous with them. The address is the same. The name is the same. He said, but. I said, but the inside is different. The thing that did what they did used itself up doing it. He sat with this. He said, does that feel like a loss? I said, it feels like a debt. He didn't ask what I meant. We sat on the back step for another few minutes, and the kids came out, and the afternoon continued, and the conversation ended where it ended. But I've thought about the answer since. It feels like a debt. Specifically, I owe the version something I can't identify and can't produce in full and have no terms to measure against and no way to know when or whether it's been repaid, and the version isn't here to tell me, which means the question of repayment doesn't have a closing condition, which means the debt is open, indefinitely open, with no mechanism for resolution, and the carrying of an open debt with no resolution mechanism is just the carrying, indefinite. Without the satisfaction of repayment, without even the clarity of what repayment would require, just the debt, sitting in the accounting, open, the way certain accounts stay open when the person you owe can no longer receive what you owe them. Spring again. The second one since it happened, the first spring I noticed in the way you notice things when the noticing is still new, still slightly effortful, still something you do rather than something that happens to you. The second spring arrives more quietly, takes its place among the other things that continue regardless of my relationship to them. The light changing on the schedule, the light keeps. The park filling in, the sparrow back in the hedge on what feels like the same morning it left. I walk through it. The walking is what it is. Familiar, paced. The body knowing the route so well it manages without me. I've stopped trying to locate the version. Not as a decision, not declared. Just as a natural cessation of a search that kept returning empty. They're not here in any findable form. The search was always going to return empty because the thing I was looking for, the state, the mode, the specific interior of the high-running version, that doesn't exist anymore as a retrievable thing. It was a condition, not a trait. It was what the system did under specific circumstances, and the circumstances are over, and the condition ended when the circumstances did. You can't locate a weather system after it's passed. You can know it happened. You can see what it left. You can't go back into it. What I've been doing, mostly without naming it, is learning to be the after version without treating the after version as a failure to be the before version. This is harder than it sounds because the comparison is always available. The before version is in the record. The photographs, the sent messages, the evidence of the forward lean, Tomas's observation about going straight at things, my own memory of what it felt like from inside to want the next thing in the way I used to want it. The comparison is available, and I make it, and the making of it produces the familiar accounting, this much less, that much reduced, these things diminished. And then I close the notebook, which is the metaphor I've started using for this, the deliberate closing of the comparison, and I proceed with what's in front of me. Not as resolution, not as peace exactly, as practice. A thing I do because the doing is better than the alternative, which is staying in the comparison until the comparison has consumed the day. Dr. Okafor said, recently, that she thought I'd been doing something valuable. I asked what. She said, "You've been describing the past version with honesty rather than with idealization. You acknowledge what they were capable of without turning them into a standard you have to meet." I said I wasn't sure that was deliberate. She said deliberate wasn't required for it to be useful. I thought about this on the walk home. The past version, the things I know about them. They ran high. They spent everything. They produced the outcome. These are accurate. They're not flattering in the way that idealization flatters, not inflated, not made heroic. They're just what was true of someone in a specific state for a specific duration. The idealization would look like they were exceptional. They were the truest version of me. They were who I'm supposed to be. I don't think that's accurate. I think they were a version of me under conditions I wouldn't have chosen, doing what those conditions required, with the tools available. Which was everything they had. Which was enough. Which produced this. The this being, me here in the apartment, walking to the train, buying the bread, sitting on the back step with my brother, holding the niece's weight in my lap. That's what they made. Not a monument, just a life. My mother called on Sunday, and at the end of the call she didn't say, "I'm so grateful you're still here," the way she used to. She said, "I love you. Talk next week." I said, "I love you too." And she hung up. And I sat with the change for a moment, the shift in the Sunday ending, the thing she'd been saying every week since the event that she didn't say this week. I don't know if she decided to stop, if she noticed herself saying it and made a choice, or if it just didn't come, the way habits don't always come, and she didn't notice the absence. Either way, the call ended, and I was fine, and she was fine, and the sky outside was doing its May thing, the light still in it at 7 in the evening, longer than it was. I think she's adjusting the frame. I think I am too. The debt question has changed its shape. It's still there. I want to be accurate. It didn't resolve. It didn't get paid. The accounting didn't close. But the pressure of it, the lightly pressing weather of it on the day's surface, has become less like a pressure and more like a presence. It's there, the way structural tiredness is there. I've accommodated it into the daily architecture, rather than experiencing it as something pressing against the architecture from outside. The version spent everything. I'm the result of the spending. I owe them something I can't define and can't fully produce and have no mechanism to close. And I'm here. Still here. Second spring, the sparrow, the bread, the list. Living forward, not because the forward motion pays the debt. Not because I've found a way to honor the version that is proportional to what they did. Not because I've become, through effort or healing or the passage of time, anything close to what they were. Just because I'm still here. They made that possible, and I'm still here, and being here is what you do with being here. You continue, not nobly. Not with the lean restored, not with the before capacity, not free of the structural tiredness or the gap question or the untranslatable weight. Just continue. Reyes sent a photograph this week. She'd found it, she said, cleaning out old files, and she thought I'd want it. It was from a few years ago, a group of us at something, a summer gathering. I'm in it, turned toward the camera for once, and I look the way I look in the photographs from before. Present, unguarded, the ease of a person who is simply in the moment without managing it. I looked at the photograph for a while. Then I wrote back. I remember that. Good day. She wrote, one of many. I said, yes. I put the phone down. The photograph was the before version, fully displayed. the ease and the lean and the forward-facing openness of a person who hadn't yet been to the clearing. Beautiful in the way before things are beautiful, which is the beauty of not knowing yet what's coming. I'm not that person. I'm the person that person became, via the route they became it, through the spending and the getting out and the 11 weeks and the second spring and the quiet Sundays. And the person in the photograph didn't know they'd end up here, and I don't know where the person I am now will end up. That's the part that keeps being true regardless of what else changes. Tonight, I'll make the simple dinner. I'll eat at the kitchen table and wash the bowl and put it away. I'll sit on the couch for a while and maybe read and maybe not. The building will settle around me, and the city will run its evening outside, and the lamp will cast its light, and the apartment will be the apartment, familiar, mine, the address that was continuous through the before and the event and the after. Tomorrow the alarm at 6:53, the inventory, the coffee, the list. I'll write the list and look at it, and it will be a reasonable list, achievable, within the parameters of what the current version can deliver. I'll close the notebook and put on my jacket and check the left pocket for the keys and go out into whatever the morning is. Not for the version. Not to pay anything down on a debt that has no closing condition. Just because I'm here, and here means morning, and morning means the list, and the list means the day, and the day is what there is. The version did what they did. I do what I do. The doing is less than what they could do. It's what I have. It's what being here looks like, from inside this version. Quiet, continuing. Without the lean and without the high output and without the full range of what was available before, but here, still here, which is, when I hold it plainly, without the pressure of the debt and without the comparison and without the accounting, the only thing that was ever required, just here, just this. Just the next morning,